On February 24th, 1933, gangsters gunned down Dennis Ziegler here in Chicago. Ziegler died in his son's arms. He leaves behind 11 children and his wife, Edna.
I'm Lissa Morgans, and you're listening to Call Edna. Previously on Call Edna. So what else do we have? We have the newspaper reporting from the 1930s describing the police's investigation. First off, we have State's Attorney Thomas Courtney instructing the chief investigator, Captain Daniel Gilbert, to arrest Sam Alex for questioning. Next, we have multiple newspapers nationwide, published from Michigan to D.C., that public enemy number one at the time, Murray Humphreys, and a cousin of Al Capone, Charles Fischetti, were questioned, but that little was learned. Episode 13, The Cousin and His Friend. Hello and welcome back to Call Edna, the podcast where we're investigating my great-great-grandfather, Dennis Bruce Ziegler's murder. As always, if you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can find Call Edna on Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, etc., everywhere where souls go to die. And tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, is the 93rd anniversary of Bruce's death. And I wanted to do something to mark the occasion. And I know I've been hinting at for quite a while that Bruce had a lot of papers in the attic in Chicago that I went through in November of last year. And I wanted to present some of those papers to you and tell the story of Bruce's life and advocacy from about 1929 to 1931. I will share some of those papers with you, as well as talk about Bruce and some updates on the investigation on YouTube Live tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern. As Bruce was murdered around 6:15-ish Central Time, this will be about 45 minutes Eastern Time after the actual event of his murder. I hope you can make it. And if you listen to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to hit follow if you want new episodes to pop up on your homepage. Let's get into today's episode. So now that we've gone over the main bosses, who I think would have either ordered or participated in Bruce's murder, it's time to get into the gangsters who may have carried out the hit. In this episode, we're going to cover Charles Fischetti and Sam Alex. And as a preview for the next episode, we're going to cover a lot of our suspects, the heavy hitters from the Capone outfit, like Marcus Looney, Klondike O'Donnell, Fur Salmons, Jack Three-Fingered White, Claude Maddox, and Frank Diamond. So at this stage in the investigation, with the quantity of people we're dealing with, I wanted to learn about their backgrounds, but mostly I wanted to zero in on what they were up to in February of 1933, and if they had a weapon of choice or a style of murder that they were known for that fits Bruce's murder profile. As you know, we have some competing fact patterns as to what exactly happened the night of Bruce's murder, but what is not in dispute is where he was murdered and the type of weapon used. He was murdered at close range, about a block away from his home, so the perpetrator knew his schedule and when he would be walking home, and it said that he was murdered with a pistol or a revolver and not a shotgun. I'm not considering whether it was a pistol or a revolver to be a factual dispute, because these were often used as shorthand terms for a handgun, as opposed to a shotgun, which was a very popular weapon of choice in Chicago at that time. And considering someone's preferred style of murder, take Frank Nitti, for example. He was known for ordering murders using a shotgun nest, so the gunman would set up somewhere along the victim's route. And then eventually, once they felt they had a clean shot or it was the right timing, they would shoot and kill them. So they would have the predictability of knowing someone's schedule like Bruce, but the weapon of choice, a shotgun, and the strategy of lying in wait isn't so similar to Bruce's. So that makes me think someone like Nitti wasn't the main person who ordered Bruce's murder. And I'm particularly interested in Fischetti and Alex because of the immediate headlines they were in following Bruce's murder. So let's start with Al Capone's famous cousin, Charles Fischetti. We have a lot of great information on Fischetti and what he was up to in February of 1933, very similar to Murray Humphreys, because he was charged with gun-toting near the time of Bruce's murder. We also know he was a former bodyguard of Al Capone. At this rate, who wasn't? And he's generally described as a gunman, a goon, and a muscle man until he rises in the Capone syndicate under Nitti and becomes an impromptu head of gambling for the Capone syndicate. And in February of 1933, he is fighting gun-toting charges for carrying a pistol. So his weapon that he carried around often was in fact a handgun. He originally stood trial with Humphreys and was sentenced to a year and a $200 fine. I believe Humphreys got $300. But around February 4th of 1933, Humphreys was arguing for a new trial or some sort of appeal, and it sounds like Fischetti's lawyer thought delaying was also a good idea. So on February 7th, his attorney asked for an additional 30-day delay to file an appeal before Fischetti had to serve his sentence. He had already gotten one 30-day delay, so this would be a full 60 days so that he could appeal. And it's granted by the judge. So we know for a fact that he was not incarcerated at the time of Bruce's murder. And as someone who worked in the criminal justice system in the modern era, I can't imagine asking a judge for additional time in this way and actually having it being granted. And this gun-toting charge comes from a raid in November of 1932, which is when the Chicago Police and State's Attorney's Office began the TNT investigation. So in November of 1932, various members of the syndicate were picked up and then later released on bond after being confined and questioned for about 80 hours regarding the TNT racket. And the main individuals picked up and questioned are very familiar to us. Charles Fischetti is one, Klondike O'Donnell is another, then we have Three-Finger Jack White, Murray Humphreys, Marcus Studdy Looney, Sam Alex, and 4 others. Fischetti is also charged at this time with conspiracy to collect campaign funds, but the charges are voluntarily dismissed by the district attorney's office for being, quote, lacking. And I've referenced TNT so much during this investigation, and in today's episode, it's going to become even more important. And I really liked the reporting from the Chicago Tribune on November 5th of 1932, as it describes the racket as it's unfolding. Quoting, originally, George Red Barker, since killed, seized control of the Coal Teamsters Union and then started giving orders to coal merchants. He and Alphonse Capone built up the Trucking and Transportation Exchange, and White, Looney, O'Donnell, Humphreys, and Fischetti, and possibly Frank Nitti, are now running it. First, they forced all but a few coal dealers to become members of the exchange. The initial payment is $10 a truck, and soon the gangsters forced material men and other users of trucks to join. The present membership comprises 40,000 trucks, which put $400,000 as initial fees into the pockets of the machine gun hoodlums, and the membership continues to pay $40,000 a month. The article then goes on to describe the scheme from the perspective of the coal dealer. Quoting again, the coal dealer pays his union drivers $8.50 a day. If he joins the exchange, he can cut the pay to $8, thereby saving $13 in a month of 26 working days, minus the $1 a month he pays as dues per truck. This is possible because the hoodlums representing the exchange forced the union, which they also represent, to sign a contract with a wage scale of $8, the union driver thereby losing $13 a month to the racketeers. But the coal dealer doesn't make the profit which might be indicated by his saving on wages. He agrees to hire all extra trucks from the exchange, and to it he pays 90 cents a ton for hauls of less than 5 miles. The charge by others is 60 cents a ton, showing the exchange makes a large profit. Dealers say their own hauling costs them 20 or 30 cents a ton, but they have to pay 90 cents to White, Looney, O'Donnell, Humphreys, and Fischetti. End quote. I like this description of TNT because it shows you at the granular level exactly how the racketeers extracted money from every part of the process. And it demonstrates also how union members and businessmen were both getting a bad end of the deal. So we know that Fischetti carried a handgun, that he wasn't incarcerated at the time of Bruce's murder, and that he was heavily involved in labor racketeering at the time. And now I'm going to skip ahead pretty far. We're going to go to 1950. And in 1950, there's a Senate committee investigating criminal syndicates, including the modern Capone outfit, and Fischetti is still very much a high-ranking member attached to the outfit, although Capone is long gone at this point. And that's when a former acting Chicago police captain, William Drury, was murdered by shotgun blasts and a pistol when he was backing his car into his own garage. And there are a lot of theories as to why he was murdered. He was an individual who was participating in the Senate investigation and giving information on the Chicago underworld in the 1930s and 40s. And some theories about his murder were that he was trying to tap the phone of Charles Fischetti and that Fischetti found out and wasn't too happy about it. There are also allegations that day, just 2 hours before his murder, that Drury was going to give additional information to the committee on his Chicago underworld experience. And so it's not surprising that someone in the syndicate decided it was time to take Drury on a ride. And in a particularly disturbing series of events, when he's murdered, he's backing up his car into his own garage. 4 shotgun shells make it through his window, and he doesn't immediately die. He's mortally wounded in his car for over 50 minutes before his wife finds him. And his wife's story is a bit odd to me as well. She says that she was in the house cooking dinner and thought she heard a car backfire from down the street because there was a garage where that was commonplace to happen. But when her husband hadn't come home by 7:30, she went to look for him and then she found him in the garage. She then went to a local convenience store to have them call the police, and then he dies on his way to the hospital. She was also described at the police station as dry-eyed. And although she may have been telling the truth, I do think sonically there's a very big difference between someone firing shotguns and pistols in very close range to your house and a car backfiring down the street, particularly because the windshield was pierced at least 4 times, there were lights shattered, and many other sounds going on in the garage to indicate that it was not a car backfiring. Fischetti has a penthouse apartment with his 2 brothers in Chicago, and police go to question him, but they're informed that he hasn't been there in months. And he also goes by an alias in his own building. He's called Dr. Fisher. And if you remember the name William Drury from the episode The List, then you'd be right. From that episode, I described him as a sergeant of police under Dan Gilbert from 1932 to 1937, and that he had written about his relationship with the outfit, and particularly regarding the top flight members who were always speedily released, or that there was some sort of fix inside the judicial system, so that they were never actually punished for their criminal activity going on at that time, including an incident in 1933 where Nitti is arrested and says that Dan Gilbert will get him out, and an hour later, he does. And Drury's murder is not solved. But I wanted to put this in here because if it was Fischetti who ordered the murder, it says a lot about the style of murder that he would participate in. He wanted a close-range, near-home shot, and there was a mixture of both shotgun and pistol shots. So not too dissimilar to Bruce's murder. And in September of 1950, life starts to catch up to Fischetti. Quoting from the Chicago Tribune on September 26, 1950, in an article titled Fischettis, Kin of Capone, Key Men in Gaming. The Fischetti brothers, who the Kefauver Committee plans to question in its investigation of interstate crime if they can be found, are Charles, 49, Rocco, 37, and their youngest brother, Joe. They are known to members of the syndicate as cousins of the late Al Capone. Charles Fischetti started out as a chauffeur and bodyguard of Cousin Al, and then became one of the key figures in the syndicate operations of gambling. He has been arrested more than 30 times by police, but the only conviction of record is a $5 fine for disorderly conduct in 1922. He was arrested by Lieutenant William Drury, who was slain in the garage of his home last night, and Captain John I. Howe when they worked as detectives for the Bureau, seized with 4 other hoodlums, including Murray Humphreys, in a raid on a loop racketeering office. Fischetti was convicted of carrying a pistol and was sentenced to serve a year in jail. The conviction was reversed by the state Supreme Court because the police had no search warrant. In 1941, Charles Fischetti was involved with the Internal Revenue Department on whether he owed taxes on gambling income, for totaling approximately $200,000 for the years 1936 and 1937. He said his gambling income for those years was only about $54,000. Rocco, also a main figure in the syndicate, was said by police to own the old Rock Garden Club, notorious Cicero gambling den. Rocco was indicted in Lake County as one of the operators of the Old Vernon Country Club, alleged gambling place, in January 1948. The indictment was nol prost. Joe Fischetti has not come to public attention, as has his older brothers. End quote. So William Drury was one of the 2 officers who arrested Fischetti on those gun-toting charges around the time of Bruce's murder and the raid on the Loop office in late 1932, which led to charges in the judicial system in early 1933. And Charles Fischetti is not the only Fischetti brother who becomes very involved in the Capone syndicate. His brother Rocco also becomes quite involved in gambling, and it's very interesting where they seem to run a gambling enterprises in the 1940s, and that's out of the Old Vernon Country Club. Although the charges will eventually disappear, as they often do, in January of 1948, a jury in Lake County indicted 4 individuals in a gambling probe. One of those individuals is Rocco Fischetti, who is listed as an officer in the Capone syndicate, but this is the late 1940s, and Bruce was murdered in the 1930s. So I don't see this as evidence that they were in Lake County at the time of Bruce's murder, and when I looked into it further, it seems like as of 1934, the Fischettis were not affiliated with this country club. So I wanted to note this as interesting, and that maybe in the 1930s, the Fischetti brothers were interested in owning property in Lake County. And Charles Fischetti will die in April of 1951, at the age of 50, at his estate on Allison Island in Miami, and the cause of death is a heart attack. But it's interesting because while the Tribune reports this on April 12th of 1951, just 8 days prior, Charles and his brother Rocco were found in Miami and brought to D.C. for questioning for that same senatorial committee. They made their bail bond and returned to Miami, and they had been evading federal police for some time, hoping to not have to testify before the senatorial committee. At one point in time, they were located in Mexico and Acapulco, and they had been attempting to evade federal authorities for quite a long time. So I think it's very interesting, similar to Nitti and similar to Humphreys. By the time they're caught and found and brought in for questioning, Charles Fischetti dies. So it seems to me that there's some sort of code of conduct in the Capone syndicate, that once the jig is up, the proper thing to do is to stay scarce, and if caught, continue to keep your mouth shut, even if that means dying. And Fischetti was married to a woman named Anne, who then appeared before the senatorial committee, but she refused to say anything about who she called, quote, Prince Charlie. And before we get to Sam Alex, I wanted to take a brief moment to discuss the term racketeer, which we've touched on briefly before. I'm so interested in the etymology of the word because although there's disputes about where it comes from, it's definitely developed in the Prohibition era, either in Chicago or New York, in Bruce's lifetime. And I wanted to talk to my mom, a retired attorney, about the importance of definitions for terms like racketeer. So, you're an attorney, retired. You have to say yes. You can't just nod.
Oh, so you're quitting. Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about the definition of racketeering, because something that I've found to be very interesting in this time period is that there's not a set definition. And then in 1934, there's a federal anti-racketeering act, but it's worded in a way that's so unhelpful that I wanted your eyes on it as an attorney. And then I found a definition from State's Attorney Thomas Courtney, who's the state's attorney in Cook County when Bruce is murdered, who we're suspicious of. And I wanted to compare and contrast the two different versions.
Okay.
I have the original 1934 statute, and I'll pass it to you to read. Get your glasses on. It's 420 subsection A, right here at the top of the page.
Okay.
Just that.
Thank you. Whoever in any way or degree obstructs, delays, or affects commerce, or the movement of any article or commodity in commerce by robbery or extortion shall be guilty of a felony.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. I think extortion has been used in different contexts. So I assume they're talking about interstate commerce.
Yeah.
And so you wonder what the movement of any article or commodity, what that means, whether it's not people.
And unlike most statutes, there's no definition section.
No, there's not.
And the word racketeer isn't present.
That's correct.
That was the weirdest thing in my opinion. It's supposed to be the Anti-Racketeering Act and it's not defined.
And then it's robbery or extortion.
Yeah, which I think could encompass, but is not all-encompassing of what labor racketeering is.
Right, one could do.
Yeah, so it's too narrow and it's undefined.
So is there any case law on this terminology?
I actually didn't look up case law on it. I read that in general it was so ineffective.
It's too broad.
Yeah. So in 1935, Thomas Courtney gave his own definition of what racketeering is. Can you read that, or is it
Yes.
too? Okay.
Come here. A racketeer, as described by Mr. Courtney, is a former leader or member of a prohibition booze gang who, forced by repeal to seek other means of maintaining income, has muscled his way into the control of organized labor unions and associations of employer businessmen and, through threats, intimidation, and violence, has demanded and obtained tribute from both labor and employers. Do you want me to read the second part?
Yeah.
It's not all there. Oh, I guess it is. A labor union official of doubtful integrity who has welcomed hoodlums and other criminals into labor organizations and has shared with them the spoils of labor and employer exploitation. So this definition is probably more of what I would say racketeering is in today's world.
Yeah, I think to me the thing that stood out the most was the second definition that singled out labor officials. Because in my opinion, you don't have to single out a labor official. You can just call out the initial activity.
Right.
So it's somewhat anti-union, which I personally think he was. I think he was he was fake when he said he supported organized labor.
Well, but I think the second definition is actually to me more clear and seems to be what was happening earlier in the early 30s.
Well, let me see. It says, a labor union official of doubtful integrity who has welcomed hoodlums and other criminals into labor organizations and has shared with them the spoils of labor and employer exploitation. I see what you're saying. The use of the word official is interesting because it's not encompassing member. Official implies some sort of title within the labor union.
Right.
To me, it's still a little anti-labor union. It's saying that there's someone who's already existing in a labor union as an official who's then welcoming in other people, implying that that initial bad seed was already in the union, and then they're going to all take part in the spoils. Whereas in reality, I think it was more that gangsters infiltrated the unions themselves.
I agree with you. I do think it was gangsters that infiltrated, but I assume, though, at some point they became a labor union official.
Yeah, they did.
And then they continued to allow their like kind into the union.
That's true. I guess if it's the secondary definition, I'm more okay with it. But to me, I still don't see the need to put it in that way. I think you can just describe the criminal behavior and it would encompass those people from the first definition. why wouldn't you just describe the actual action, the criminal action that's going on? Why feel the need to label them as labor union officials?
Right. And actually, then the first definition, it's interesting to me that it only applies to prohibition.
Yeah, which it was growing out of Prohibition era, but it is limiting.
Right. And that's so there's prohibition or other ways to get into unions to make money in some way.
Yeah. To me, that's almost like background information as opposed to the definition of the criminal activity.
True.
It's like it's arisen out of this delineated need for previous bootleggers to get into a new racket, to a new type of way of making money. If this is the state's attorney who's supposed to be prosecuting these people, neither of these definitions are very actionable. Like if you think of a basic tort like negligence, there's a very clear process and like 4 very clear steps of, duty, breach, etc. And here that's very lacking.
No, I agree with that. But Mr. Courtney, though, did he base this description on any state law? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that he could just come up with his own definition of what.
It's weird. To my knowledge, there is no state law at this time. The only anti-racketeering law in the books is the federal one. And from my understanding, they're using state law charges of conspiracy, extortion, those types of more general criminal activities to get at racketeering.
Well, did he win any cases in racketeering with his definition?
He's the one who brought the main TNT racketeering case that I mention a lot on the podcast, but he famously obtains no convictions. I mean, there are many allegations throughout the years that he's very much a part of the Capone outfit. So he brings these cases, but no one ever serves any time. So he gets a lot of headlines and press about, oh, we're taking on all, the gangsters, but no results obtained against them at the end of the day.
I mean, even the terminology muscled his way into control of organized labor unions. It's like, it's not muscled.
It's inflammatory to be a good headline. It's not actually a good definition.
Right.
Yeah, because what's that mean?
Right.
In terms of the legal aspect.
He tried, but it's really like he's just describing what somebody does, not the elements of a crime.
Yeah, it's a great description of what he thinks is happening in the jurisdiction. Right. But in terms of an actionable legal term, it has no teeth.
Case, an actionable case against a racketeer.
Yeah. And something that's interesting to me is when he says, a former leader or member of a prohibition booze gang who, forced by repeal to seek other means of maintaining income, that clause, forced by repeal to seek other means of maintaining income,
so
is quite political against the prohibition movement itself. He's saying
that, but I think he's also saying most of this action, I guess in his view, came after prohibition ended.
Yeah, that's true. He's defining racketeer on, because this is 1935, so prohibition's been repealed. But in reality, racketeering comes about in the late 20s during prohibition.
Right. So it is weird that he only defines it with regard to prohibition because there are other ways to racketeer, I think.
Yeah. It's almost like it would have been forced by threat of repeal but repeal itself it's too static of a time period. And that has muscled his way into control of organized labor unions and associations of employer businessmen, and through threats, intimidation, and violence, has demanded and obtained tribute from both labor and employers. I do like that this definition includes the fact that they were doing it as the double tax system. I described that in episode 4, The Racket, that they didn't just go from the labor union side, but they also got money from the employers through trade associations, and that was a big part of the racket. So I do like that this definition touches on that.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, that's how they really obtained so much control, and that was in effect in TNT. So it's probably where Courtney's deriving this definition from, is his own reading of those documents. But it was the way for them to get money from the employers and the unions. And then we have Sam Alex. There's certainly not the same amount of information about Alex as there is about Fischetti, but he is so important. And similar to Fischetti, his brother is also very involved in the Capone syndicate, although in a way that kind of eclipses Sam Alex, as Gus Alex, his brother, becomes a top member of the Capone syndicate in the 1940s. But back to Sam. He's on the younger side at the time that Bruce is murdered, born around 1908, and he's often described as a gunman and a gangster and involved in the Capone outfit, but he's not described often with specificity about what he does or where he does it. He's referenced in the raid in late 1932 involving TNT as someone who was present at the Loop office with Humphreys. And although I wasn't able to find an article that described the exact type of way Alex liked to kill or the weapon that he used, I was able to find additional information about the day after Bruce's murder from the Belvedere Republican on February 25, 1933. Quoting, "The state's attorney's office today ordered the arrest of 2 Union agents and the assassination last night of Dennis B. Ziegler, 57-year-old secretary of the Hoisting and Portable Engineers Union. Following a swift investigation of the murder of Ziegler, father of 11 children, orders were issued to arrest William E. Maloney, Union business agent, and Sam Alex, lieutenant for Murray Humphreys, Chicago's public enemy number 1 and Teamsters Union business agent." End quote. I just wanted to pause here because before I found articles in our family archive and articles like this one, I was under the impression that no one had ordered to be arrested for Bruce's murder, and that is not the case. In fact, William Maloney and Sam Alex were both ordered to be arrested the day after Bruce was murdered. But from what I can tell, neither of them are ever arrested. Quoting again from the article, Ziegler, it was revealed, had been in fear of death and asked protection from the state's attorney's office only a few days ago. Ziegler had been opposing Maloney in a hectic and sometimes bloody labor racketeering war. Skipping ahead, for 3 years, Ziegler, secretary of the Hoisting and Portable Engineers Union, had survived efforts to kill him. But last night, 3 gunmen shot him to death within a block of his house as he was walking home. The 3 killers escaped in the automobile which carried them to the scene of the ambush. One of the gunmen ran over to Ziegler and fired 3 shots from a pistol as the Union official lay on the sidewalk. The assailant then joined his companions and the automobile sped away. End quote. In coming episodes, we're going to go through the fact pattern of Bruce's murder yet again, but I wanted to include this because Sam Alex is increasingly suspicious, and I have more information that it was Sam Alex who was Bruce's murderer. From a letter written in 1992, contained in the attic along with Bruce's papers. Quoting, "The detectives told my mother at this time that Sammy Alex was probably the assassin, but that he was probably long gone. And, of course, they also told her that she wouldn't be able to afford the cost of trying to find him." End quote. And this description does fit the MO of Sam Alex. He used to make hits and then disappear, seemingly into thin air, only reappearing when another hit was made. In September of 1933, Alex is listed as having an outstanding vagrancy warrant. Then, in January of 1934, he fails to show up for a court hearing in the TNT racket, the racket that lists him as the former business agent of the Excavating, Grading, and Asphalt Teamsters and Chauffeurs Union. And you know what that union is involved in part? Road paving. In February of 1935, the police were looking for Alex in connection with a strike war, but couldn't find him. And this was common for Alex, who went by aliases and lived outside of Cook County. There's an article in the Tribune on June 27, 1962, describing the modern hit process that the Capone syndicate was involved in from 1958 to that time. And although this is far after Bruce's murder, it's still interesting because they describe how Sam Alex is still in the game, and that he's one of 13 hired contract killers at that time for the syndicate. And the MO of killers like him are that they stalk their victims after approval from the 4 controlling gang lords. And one of those gang lords is his brother, Gus Alex, who from 1930 to 1960 has risen to one of the heads of the Capone syndicate. And Sam Alex is described as one of the most secretive of the group of 13. Quoting from the article, Sam Alex, 54, who seeks the country life when he is not busy with gang missions, on a farm near Cassopolis, Michigan. His neighbors know Alex as Sam Taylor. A former labor skate and safe blower, he was listed as public enemy in 1933. Later on in the article, Sam Alex is a strange farmer. He keeps no livestock. He has no crops. He lives quietly and journeys to Chicago once in a while. He visits here and may be innocent enough, but police are intrigued by the fact that his appearances in the city coincide with syndicate hits. End quote. His brother Gus is heavily investigated in the late 50s, and there's an FBI file on Gus Alex from 1958. And it mentions there that Sam Alex used to go by multiple aliases, such as Sam Taylor and Herbert Taylor, and that he lived in Michigan in the 1940s. And Sam Alex will die in 1987. There's a Tribune article from February 12th that says he was found shot to death at age 78 in his home, ruled as a self-inflicted gunshot wound. There was also $4,600 in a shopping bag, and noted that he had a cancer diagnosis. And who found his body? His brother, Gus Alex. We've learned a lot this episode about Charles Fischetti and Sam Alex, and I feel strong enough to say that at this point, I think it could have been Sam Alex or William Maloney who pulled the trigger against Bruce. Although Fischetti is incredibly suspect, and I am curious about the involvement in Lake County in the 1940s with himself and his brother Rocco, there seem to be more ties between Bruce and other people in our investigation so far that make me want to place them in the car as opposed to Fischetti. So where are we now? Next week, we're going to go through the other heavy hitters of the Capone syndicate and continue to look for their MOs, how they like to murder, where they were in February of 1933, and what type of gun they like to use. So I'll see you next time in the heavy.